So I welcome John Antill today to our talk webinar. Talk stands for Technology Association of Louisville, Kentucky, and I am Dawn Yankeelove, Executive Director of our local Tech Council. The Tech Council has roughly 3,500 participants across the state and mostly in the Louisville, Kentucky area. And we have a number of key projects we work on. We're supporting STEAM curriculum with youth, particularly in the areas of skateboard builds and tech girls. We participate in state, local, and national public policy as it relates to tech public policy. And the next event will be May 11th, a national event. If anyone here on the call would like to participate, we'll be sending more information about that out as we get closer to the end of the month. And so if you need to know more about Talk, I'm going to put in the chat our website. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. www.talklou.com is your primary resource. And we have, generally speaking, we have monthly meetings. Some are virtual, some are live. And then we have special events like the Talk Cybersecurity Summit every June in the middle of the month. And you'll hear more about that as we get into the next few months. So today we have brought back John Antill. John spoke at our Tech Fest event in August of last year, and everyone was so impressed with his way of organizing and giving you real world, tidbits that you can use in your job, that we decided to bring him back and let's talk a little bit about how we deal with knowledge and retain good people around us in our processes. So John, give us a little bit of your background before we get started here.
So my name is John Antill. I've worked for the U.S. Army in some shape or fashion since 2008. Before that, I was a firefighter from 98 to 2008 for the Marine Corps and as a contractor. And what I found out is that everybody is doing knowledge management. We just may not call it that. So one of the few things that I've found out is that we're really good at training people. We're really great at retiring and losing people, but we're not that great at retaining our knowledge. And what I mean by that is the tacit knowledge. And we'll go into the statistics and numbers and why this is important here in a little bit, but it's just something to keep in mind. All right, you ready, Miss Dawn?
Yes, let's get started.
All right. So I'll be talking today about knowledge retention and knowledge transfer. So why do we even care about it? And it's because that every time we lose knowledge in our organization, we lose money. Simple matter of fact. This is not something that is a very small impact, as we'll find out, but it's actually a fairly large impact upon our bottom line. I have the numbers here to go on for in a second, but even the loss of one person in operations can set us back a couple weeks. Somebody who has been doing the job for a couple years and we lose them, we don't really realize exactly everything that they're doing. So when they leave, that negative impact, because now we've got to find out what they were doing, what teams they were on, and what they were supporting, we've got to shift that to the other people until we can get that role filled out. So what about knowledge retention? There's different processes, techniques, tools. I mean, we can go list on which program is the best program for what we're going to do. But we found out through different methods that these are the common ways that people are doing them. The exit interviews, the mentor protege package. They might have some places to be doing a knowledge cafe, which you'll find more overseas. than you would do here stateside, which is quite a shame because they're quite interesting and they bring a lot to the table. And then of course we have the different applications that we use, websites. How many people have heard, hey, yeah, about that handover book, I just put it on SharePoint. How many people have heard that before? So, and the new international standard 30401 adopted in the year 2018, it's the knowledge management standard for the entire world now. There's 9 areas in there that talk about knowledge retention and how you guys are going, how your organization achieves it. That's the cool part. The hard part is how do you do it? And there's no right or wrong way to do this. So let's give you guys some numbers here to focus on, because that's what you guys are really wanting to know. $180,000 in 2 years is what it costs to lose an average mid-level person on average. It takes time to get new hires up to speed, and it can take 20+ weeks for entry to mid-range positions. For your senior level managers and executives, it could take up to 26 weeks. The actual cost that I projected up here is a percentage of their hourly salary and the cost of it to actually hire a new person. I was curious on how much the average pizza boy, the one person that makes your pizza, how much it costs to train him. And we're talking, this is the guy who puts the pizza in the oven. And when I was talking to this pizza joint up in Augusta, Georgia, they said it takes them $10,000 to hire, train, and get somebody proficient on putting a pizza in the oven. And I went, that's a lot of money from anybody. So what we're looking at doing is finding ways to lower that cost for you, speed up their time on bringing people up to speed. And we're not going to look at the overall career of a person. So if I was going to be doing a knowledge transfer and retention on a person, I would look at what is their most mission essential part of their job, and I'd be focusing on their tasks and capabilities within that role. I wouldn't be looking as the whole person unless it was somebody who spent their entire life working for that company from the ground up, because too many of us have worked for different organizations. Some of the knowledge is not essential to our company. So these are the average compilation from 1992 to 2007 on the average pay of what it's going to cost your company. For workers earning less than $50,000 annually, which is about 3/4 of the workers in the United States, 22 case studies showed a typical cost of over 20% of their salary. The same positions earning $75,000 or less, which includes 9 to 10 in the US workers. Now, these positions, you got to remember, we're talking jobs that are under $30,000, 20% of that $30,000 is quite a lot. As we go up, the cost becomes exponentially even more detrimental to the company, of up to 213% of the annual salary for a CEO. So talking about some change on knowledge management and knowledge retention. So this is what the US Army found out that they were having a problem with. 2% of their job losses were due to terminations. And they found out that 43% of their workforce is going to retire in the next 5 years. And this was because if you look back 20 years ago, what were we doing? We were ramping up for the war on terror. This is actually across all the DoD federal agencies, that this is pretty similar to what they're looking at. So what we did was we focused in on the one aspect we could, and what we found out was that people like to spend between 5 and 10 years on a job. They really do. They don't want to move too quickly because they want to get that knowledge and that training time behind them. You're going to find a lot less people working 10 or more years, because nowadays, if the average person retires with the company, somebody goes, why were you with them the entire time? What factors, cause you to stay there? And they're going to most companies are going to look down on them for some reason. But this is also the inverse of what it used to be in the 1950s. So as you can see, the numbers are pretty much like Ms. Dawn and I were talking about. You got the first big bulk within 1 to 3 years of somebody getting on a new job, and then the next big bulk is 5 to 10 years. And we need to focus on the 5 to 10 years because those people have been trained by the company. They are working on different products and programs, and they're going to have the most institutional knowledge that we need to look at. Different fun ways to retain this knowledge. You have a lot of companies now doing some of the programs that the Army has done, like the after action review, where they've found out that it can apply to industry, because what it does is it looks at what was supposed to happen, what did happen, and how can we fix it without putting any blame on any one group. And that's something too that is looked at on the way we retain our knowledge. If we think of it as leaving a legacy or helping somebody out, we are going to produce a much better product than if we have to, say, for example, create a turnover binder because that's what the boss ordered us to do. The human knowledge, human psyche loves to leave legacies, and they love to help people. Knowledge is power only if shared, is the new saying. But these are different ways to do it. As I said, a World Cafe is kind of unique because it takes one person speaking, and you have about 25 attendees and 5 tables. And you let the person speak for about 15 minutes, and you give everybody about 5 minutes at their tables, talk about what they said. And then we're going to have them switch tables. And we do this iteration for 5 times. And that way, everybody actually gets more of a breadth of knowledge about what that person was saying, rather than just attending a 15-minute conference by them. They're pretty sure everybody else has worked on most of these other ones. And some examples on how to do this. So everybody's probably seen a heat map or critical skill. Pretty sure not everybody's seen a buckyball. And they're kind of cool because you can see right here, one person, and we are now showing how well they are cross-trained versus the heat map on the bottom that just shows, hey, we got customer needs and billing. Person 1 can train people on sales. They can perform their HR duties, and they can train other people on legality issues. So there's different ways to categorize on their training. And these buckyballs actually were presented in 2016 to the CILIP, the name escapes me for a minute, as a best practice for insurance companies on how to identify which areas they need to train and retain knowledge on. The biggest thing is this part. How are we going to judge our effectiveness on our return on investment? whether do we need to, my favorite one is do not replace. What is the cost if we do not replace this person and this knowledge? Well, there's a little known product called FogBank. And believe it or not, it's crucial to the US nuclear war industry. And the Air Force forgot how to build it. And they ran out of all their stock. So they had to find a guy who was on the team in 1950, and they had to pull him back on in around 1995. And the problem is that true, they were making FogBank to today's standard, but the FogBank that worked with the nuclear weapons was built in 1950s. The equipment wasn't as refined and the processes weren't so stringent. So they almost lost the ability to actually do our nuclear defense. So that lost knowledge would have been detrimental to the US. When interviewing the people, it's kind of interesting that nowadays that anywhere between 2 to 4 interviews is standard now, when it used to be 1, because people are worried about making the wrong decision about hiring the wrong person and causing higher turnover, because it's going to cost them to recruit more people. So how much is your recruiter's time? How much are you spending on these interviews? That's part of going to be your effectiveness on your return on investment on this retention. Also, you got to look at is how overworked are the remaining staff? Can I afford to put this job off 6 months from now? Or is it something that my staff is already pretty much stretched? This knowledge, being able to do knowledge retention, will help give you a little bit more flex on this for the training and everything. So I hope you enjoyed the high level overview of knowledge retention, and I'm ready and exciting for some questions.
So what we can do is type the questions in the chat box and we will, go from there. I think there was a lot of data that we went through things. Can you go back, John, to the slide where we talk about the different ways that you can do, like you had the World Cafe, which actually we've used that inside the talk network before, and it's very effective to get people to start discussing, particularly around cybersecurity. We've used it, but some of these other things, would you maybe give us a quick look at what they are? Like open space technology, explain a little bit more about that one.
So OST and RSD came from the organizational development groups. And what's interesting on them is that it's designed to work with a lot of people. These are heavily influenced on the amount of people that you put onto them. And they're going to, if you have enough space for 50 people, you put 40 in there to solve the same problem. Rapid solution design is exactly what it is. And it's how fast can you prototype something out? The workout and the wikithons I love because it's one wiki page that everybody's constantly working on. Appreciative inquiry is where you're actually asking questions, why, how, and really taking it to understanding. The master classes, that's one's always fun because that's when you send somebody and it costs money to send somebody to it. Exit interviews and turnover binders are going to be your least favorable options because exit interviews, unless the person's truly honest and they're not leaving on a sore side, they're going to burn bridges and say everything that you're doing is wrong. Turnover binders will hold within about 15% of your knowledge, and I have never seen anybody pick them up more than once. So Do we have any questions
Yep.
now, Ms. Dunn?
Yes, we do. All right, let's see. We have, can you elaborate on the 1 interview versus 2 to 4 interviewers? Yeah. Okay. So I see in the big companies, sometimes you'll have to be interviewed by several people before there's a acceptance of that you might be a good candidate. I mean, how do you look at that one way or another?
So my thing is that if you're pulling people into interview and and the person who's actually making the hiring decision is on that first interview panel and they like the candidate, then why are you going to make them continue on? You know, people forget that an interview's a two-way street. It's you interviewing me about what I know and what I can do for your company. And by the way, at the same time, can they fit with your culture too? And that's something that people forget, is that the interview is a two-way street. So the more you have me interview, the more it's going to look like, wow, they really don't trust their leads to do what they've empowered them to do. Because if I'm doing an interview with the hiring board manager, why do I have to do another 3 to 4 people panel because they work with them? So it's just something to look over at, because now, are you wasting your own resources, your own time? How much money is that second interview really worth in your own manpower time? How much are you pulling away from what they're actually doing in your organization? Figure, we'll make a round number. Everybody makes $25. Every hour that you have them interviewing costs your company $75. Is that guy making $10 an hour really worth $75? Or is he really that key and, you know, he's going to be making $25? So look at stuff like that, because that's where you're going to start losing the value of your knowledge retention and how you actually gain the knowledge, because the cost expenditure over the cost learned is not an effective return on investment. Does that help answer the question?
So that was from Jim Martin at Marwood. We have another question. So this is from Leanne with LAL Computers. It's often difficult to get people to explain what their job is and what they do because they are thinking that knowledge is power. Is it difficult to create that environment? That's true. Sometimes people don't want to share. You know, the culture or environment that is training others has to be safe. So the idea that just because I gave it away doesn't mean my job's now up for the next guy.
Right. And you'll actually find appreciative inquiry works really great at this, because so my current job, everybody's working as hard as they can. And of course, they call me in to start looking at ways to improve their work. And there's 2 ways to take it. Either it's hostile, it's me coming in and telling you how to do your job, or it's me coming in and observing, working with you, and doing appreciative inquiry on what you do as a job. Because if once I understand it, I can help your process. We had a person that part of their job was to monitor and track everybody's annual training. So we color coded it and it's awesome. She asked, well, why can't we just have everybody else input their stuff? And we looked at her and said, man, that's one of your key responsibilities, to make sure everybody's done right. Are you sure you want to let this out of your hands? And she went and thought about it for a second, goes, you know, I have a hard enough time trying to get people to do their training. I would hate to see what happened if they had to actually input it. And we went, exactly. So on ways to actually get their knowledge, the ability to do that is partially appreciative inquiry, partially the observe, practice, partner, and you're not going to take over the responsibilities. But what you're going to do is you're going to keep everything together on what you're doing on them, especially if it's somebody who's toxic. We actually have seen a knowledge retention process that I didn't go over here because it's very complicated, but they The base sum is they develop 4 people, the subject matter expert, and 3 people who are 1 or 2 jobs away, and then the new guy. And these 3 people ask questions of that subject matter expert. And over time, they learn a lot of what they're doing. So the impact is now shared among 3 to 4 people. But they did that knowledge retention process on a tech coder who was very toxic to the culture, and were able to remove that person without any loss of knowledge. So you can do this through different methods of appreciative inquiry. I haven't seen a lot where if you ask the right question, that people won't help you out, because I found out that people say about age 55 and older that are still in the workforce, they really want to leave a legacy, especially partners and higher level managers. They want to leave that stamp of approval on a company. So for them, it's, hey, sir, I know that you've been doing this ops job forever and a day. What would you recommend on how to do this position so that we get the right person, when you retired? And they're normally like, well, you need somebody who is no nonsense type of person. And you're going, well, maybe not, but you listen to them and you write down their answers and stuff. And because the other aspect is exact opposite. You get somebody that has been a digital native their whole life. That would be 35 and younger, and they're going to be more of a sharing culture because that's what they've done their whole lives. They've gone on to Reddit, Facebook, and asked for questions. And Yahoo Answers, I almost forgot them. So there's different ways to do each knowledge retention process, and you just got to find the way it works for you. So do we have another question?
Don't think we do at this point, but let's go back, take us through the next slides a little slower here. So beyond
Okay.
this slide, it just seemed like it was very fast, and I thought, well, let's
Okay.
talk about, so these areas, yeah. So which one do you use the most? I'm curious in the work that you do. Is it the capability heat map? I mean, that's the one you see from government agencies most likely is the capability heat map or the diversity risk heat map at this point.
Yeah, so here's a capability heat map. I don't use this one that often. The big reason why is because what I'm looking to identify is this critical skills versus retirement risk. And the critical skill, you'll see it on a lot of video games where it's not quite a circle, but it's weird shape. The higher level that critical skill is, we'll say, since this is a tech focused area, my last job was on offensive cyber. Well, in offensive cyber, a critical skill risk would be, we'll say, for example, Windows 10, even though we know everybody uses it. Well, if you have that training in Windows 10, your critical skill is 1. But if you know how to run a Unix environment, I bet you not that many people out there can actually run a Unix environment. So that puts their critical skills up higher. And then the next 3 are the retirement risk, the flight risk, and the aspiration risk. The flight risk is back to the adage of the CEO talking to the CFO going, we really need to train our people. And the CFO looks at CEO and he goes, why? It's going to cost us money. And then they'll leave. CEO looks at him and says, what if they stay? So that aspiration risk, that's that person who's always hungry, always looking for the new job. Yeah, they're easy to identify.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of incentives now to do certifications inside the larger companies. I mean, do you see that as addressing the aspiration risk, or is that?
I see that more as their diversity risk heat map, because if they have one or two people that are, we'll say, Unix certified, they don't have a lot of diversity in that job. And if anything happens to any one of those two people, then that becomes a major issue. But by doing certifications, so all the certification states is that I in the industry know what I am doing to this level. And that will help mitigate your diversity risk by having more people certified on something.
A question.
Is there a risk versus reward? Yes.
One of the questions was, where can we find more information on identifying and documenting the critical skills? Yeah, are there certain templates that you would suggest or places to look?
So the critical risk is going to and skills are going to change for every position. But for most part, you guys can, I chose these because that you can Google them and find really great skills and great products from them. So for critical skills in one company that operates, it may be their training program, and their critical skills are their trainer. It's something that costs a lot to get and takes a long time to find. Is a good example of a critical risk skill. A plus definitely is not a critical skill, but maybe your CISSP people, they are a critical skill because you are in that type of build. It's up to each company to identify what critical skills they need. And then those ones are normally going to be what you require that new person to have when you send out that job recruitment analysis. So HR probably has a list of those. Or you can just look at the job and say, you know, this guy does a lot of Windows Server stuff. Definitely need Windows Server. And maybe they don't need 2 to 3 years of Windows Server. Maybe they need 5 to 6 with the cert. That is what I'd identify as a critical skill. And if I only had one guy in that range, then it's also showing in my diversity heat map. So it's up to individual departments to identify these items, but
really, yes, in a company that's over 20 people, you ought to be able to get someone who's doing the hiring to make some sense of what the critical skills are needed. But then that has to be augmented by the direct report, right? Because IT changes so much in terms of what's necessary. So
yeah, coming up, it's going to be Windows 11, and what, you know, for anybody who's on a desktop support team, you don't need everybody to understand Windows 11, but you might want to know, your backend server admins might want to know it, and your trouble desk people might want to know it. So that might be something you might want to look at ahead of time, you know, because that could be an area of retention that you look at and go, you know, if we get ahead of the game on this, we can actually reduce our overall footprint on it. So it's some of that
the
stuff.
Other critical skills you're expecting, like data analytics, I would think anything around big data is going to be important.
Believe it or not, data analytics, they're a dime a dozen right now. I can find 5 or 6 people anywhere in the world on doing data analytics. But what I'd consider a critical skill right now would be coding in any type of script, because they are right now being headhunted by app developers, game developers, different companies, because they're really starting to realize, especially with the advent of Adobe Flash going away, their web pages need updating. I actually visited a web page today that still had an Adobe 10 Flash in it, and I could not run it because I'm on Chrome. So that company's probably not going to get a lot of traction. Indiana might want to look at that as their auction house site, because you can't get to it. But those code developers, everybody knows, are in high demand. But behind them is technical writers, because they're the ones who make sense out of the gobbledygook that the code person's writing. And just not any tech writer, because face it, I can put gobbledygook down and sound really, really good. But people that can take tech and put it into layman speak, who actually understand the capability behind it and go, you may not need to know all that, but you do need to know that the house is painted blue. I don't care what shade of blue it is, it's blue. That might be somebody that you can identify. Look at your teams, look at who's being requested outside of your office the most. That would be a critical skill and a person that I wouldn't want to lose. And it's really hard to look at the different skills and tell you guys what's critical in your own company without actually knowing exactly what you value. So what else, Ms. Dunn?
Let's go on to the next slide and we'll ask a couple more questions here.
Okay.
Okay, we talked about this a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's go back and because I'm going to.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Have a little bit more discussion about.
So this one right here is this part right here. So out of all these, this was how many people were going to, on average, the government loses a year. And that's, you're going to find out quite really big, but that transfers, though they're transferring within the government. So it's somebody who got a promotion or a better job that they like better, that's close to home. So in any organization, these are the actual numbers. You're going to find some.
Don't you think people over the age of 65 are really starting second careers or third careers, or you know, they're saying they're retiring, but then within a year and a half, they're basically back in full-time employment doing something different, slightly different.
Yeah.
We see more of that. Yeah.
So what I see with that is they have critical skills that, you know, when they retired, I've actually known one lady who retired from the federal workforce. She's been pulled back for her expertise now twice from retirement. Because she is so good at what she does that, you know, she's retired. She tried to retire twice and they've pulled her back, and this will be her third time retiring from the US government. And it's because she has a skill set that is immensely good at doing her job of recruiting. And she's very good at it. She's been doing it for a long time, and she's trying to train other people. But the problem is they end up going to another type of job and not using it. So when I do my knowledge retention with her, because I've set this one up as a standing one, I like to ask her different questions based upon what I understand what she does. And I have understood that I know about as much as what she does as she knows about knowledge management, which is a very broad field. She can tell you down to the HR regulation. She's that person who's always going to retire next year. But she's an anomaly. And that's pretty much too what you're looking at on that, Don, is they do plan on retiring. But what they find is that they failed to plan properly for retirement, and now they're having to bring in extra income because of something, a life event happened, or they don't like fishing as much as they said they would, and they get bored. I like those because they come back as consultants and they only work when they need to. So, you know,
I think even big companies like Humana indicated that they have, you know, about, I think a whole percentage, maybe 2% of their workforce is over 70 now. So it's like small, but people who are, have, like you said, skills that are important are staying longer, or they're being recruited later in their career to come on board.
And the other part too is they're having to stay in those jobs because we didn't do knowledge retention on them, because we didn't do our succession planning properly. They can't retire because they believed in the old adage of knowledge is power, therefore I'm going to hoard it. And that's that thing, is that knowledge retention doesn't exactly take away your job. What we do is we make you more invaluable. The better you do his knowledge retention board with me, the more I find and the more I ask on what you do. And it's quite interesting, because one person was getting ready to get their job cut till we did a knowledge retention board on him and realized that, yeah, that guy was one of our smartest people on that product. And we ended up actually losing that person to ADP. And now he's ahead of one of their regional cybersecurity branches. So, how much knowledge they have, well, that's dependent and needed upon you. So, because stuff like how long they've been working for the companies could be irrelevant. These could be how much of their asset value is. And that's something I didn't talk about here, is that soft skills in a company, they actually now are part of the overall bottom line. And those soft skills, they're the people. And
Define, go ahead and define what you mean by soft skills, like leadership. What else?
So we're talking about soft skills are going to be your things that are not physical in nature. You can't throw that chair at them. Well, you can throw a chair at a person, but then they probably quit and you lose that soft skill. But we're talking things that are intrinsic in nature, such as, patents, because a patent holds no value until the product's produced in place. So let me pull it up real quick, Ms. Dawn, because it's actually quite an astounding number on the soft skills capability. And people fail to realize that the number, and I don't want to misquote me, that's why I'm looking at it. So on Real KM magazine, the intangible assets for a few of the Fortune 500 companies was 20 to 25 trillion dollars. Since 1975, 17% of your intangible assets were part of the company. In 2020, that number has now grown to 90% of your company's value is your intangible assets. Examples are brand value, customer data, software, patents. So if we look at 90% of your company's value, we'll say the company's, $100,000, then that means $90,000 is in your information, is your soft value. And that was by Ocean Tomo. If you've heard of them, they are a company that produced this report annually, and they look at it, and that's where this knowledge retention comes into play, because as Forbes replies, over the past half century, we've witnessed a somewhat silent revolution in terms of what factors are really driving business valuations. As our global economy has gradually shifted away from an industrial base and focuses more on services and knowledge, enter the age of the intangible asset, an increasingly vital component of corporate worth. So, 10% is just your hard tacit stuff. 90% is now that. That's staggering. So, that's that's your software code all the way down to your non-revenue rights. So more and more of your information is being locked up in your knowledge retention programs that you build.
So it is really the middle knowledge worker that we need to spend more time on. I mean, we always spend time on the senior VP level and the entry level, but it's that middle category.
The person, yeah. And that's the cool part, is because they're the people actually doing the stuff. They're the ones, behind the scenes making that boss look good. But if we don't actually understand what they're doing, then, we need to, and one way I found out to really do these knowledge retention to reduce the amount of time is process out of Scrum, what everybody's working at. But that's just your daily stand-up meeting. Instead of, in Scrum, that works. But in most of this other corporation stuff, what we're actually looking at is more, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is where I have a problem at. And let me help you on that document, Al, because I can really get working on it. It's that type of knowledge that we're losing because we move to automation, or we don't see the second and third order effect of what that person's job is before we start adding more stuff on top of them. Does anybody else have a question for me?
Yeah, let's see, we've got something here. Says Leanne has commented the cost of losing an employee is similar to the cost of losing a client. It's huge, and that's real life. That's a real life lesson, and it's hurtful. Yeah.
And believe it or not, it could actually cost more than losing a client. Think about those companies that rely upon single coders. If you lost your coding capability for even a week, how much is that going to cost your company? Well, that depends on which week it is, right? Is that the week the app's actually working, or is that the week that the app is glitching out and everybody's quitting on you? And you'll find out that people don't quit in one person doesn't quit. You'll find they quit, and then their best friend quits, and you lose a cycle of people. And it could be over as something as simple as remote working. Nowadays, that's pretty big, but it didn't used to be. So, and that actually brings up another point, is in remote work, it actually makes it harder to understand. And so part of what I do on a daily basis is I send my boss an email every morning of what I plan to do that day. I never get anywhere near that plan done. I also email her at the end of the day what I've done. Now, everybody may say, okay, well, yeah, great on you. It's actually a tracking mechanism for her in case something was to happen to me, that she knows where I stand on all my projects. And that's something that I've developed in my own sense from the military, because I'd rather overshare the knowledge with you guys than undershare, because if you understand what I'm doing that day, you can drive my tasks and have me help out other people. But if you don't understand what I'm doing, then you have no idea whether I'm working as hard as I can, or if I'm sitting back there applying to every single job that comes up on LinkedIn. So take it for what it's worth. It's something I do. Everybody has their own ways of communicating with their boss. But when you look at knowledge retention, which way does your boss actually know of how you're doing everything? And it actually helps her out, because she can move me as needed. So, and the other aspect too of losing an employee is that your opposition now has that capability, and they can get that client and that person and everything else that they bring to the table. So they now have that soft, tangible asset. Any other questions?
Very thoughtful. And I think that's what we need to do sometimes, is slow down and take a good look at what is really occurring amongst the team and how we define the team, and then how we break the team down across divisions, both vertically and horizontally. And it's really critical to continuing operations. And most people feel like, well, we'll continually replace the person.
Yeah, so I've got an interesting story with that. So in 1995, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife introduced wolves into Yellowstone National Park. So the wolves used to be there. We killed them and hunted them out of existence in that area. And they didn't, the ranchers and everybody up in arms because there's now wolves and they're going to eat their cattle. Well, that wasn't the issue. The wolves actually drove the big game herd animals up into the mountains, allowing the coyotes to eat more rabbits, and the rabbits were able to populate better, which produced better game. The deer and the elk and the moose were back in their natural habitat, which allowed the prairies to regrow trees and grass, which in turn allowed the banks of the river to strengthen. And every year that with that flood beforehand, they would lose a large area of that riverbank due to the rushing snow water. Since the wolves are there, the creeks and the rivers in Yellowstone National Park have not moved more than 1% out of their deviated norm. That was a third order effect of introducing wolves. What's the third order effect of you losing that information? Something to think about.
Well, on that note, I think we can call today to a close, and we really appreciate your time, John.
Anytime, Miss Dawn.
All right. And so don't forget that we will have live meetings going back in February, and we will look forward to our Talk Cybersecurity Summit in June and our TECNA, Tech Councils of North America fly-in on May 11th. So we'll keep everyone posted on what's next inside the Talk environment and how you can participate at talkloo.com. Thank you so much, John. And thank you everybody for being here. And
thank you everybody for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.